a long time. So let's look at chapter 3, verse 10 to 11. Chapter 3, verse 10 to 11. Someone can read that. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 10 to 11. Was great testimony about how the doors were closed. That can also be an encouragement. So the Apostle Paul uses his own long association to urge Timothy to be loyal to Paul and also to persevere in the gospel. And then finally, he uses Timothy's own spiritual history. Timothy's own spiritual history. We can see this in the first chapter in 2 Timothy. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5, 7. You can read it.
1:5. I am reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded now lives in you also. For these reasons, in you through the laying of my hands. For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline.
So I said that the Apostle Paul is using Timothy's own spiritual history. So Timothy had been brought up in a home where the mother was a believer and the grandmother was a believer. So that means he must have experienced firsthand the kind of life that they lived, remembering that Timothy's father was not a believer. I don't know whether you have been brought up in a home where one of the parents is not a believer, and especially the father. When the father is not a believer, there are so many challenges. Sometimes you will be beaten for going to church or coming home late from school, from church, and so many other issues. But Paul, you know, there are people, if you spend time with them, your life cannot remain the same. They will transfer some grace. And Paul is one man who had gone through a lot of trouble as a preacher of the gospel. So when he's telling Timothy to persevere, Timothy has no question to answer because he had seen Paul do it himself. So that history and that association with the Apostle Paul should be a reason, or it is one thing that Paul uses to urge him to persevere.
Evildoers and impostors will go from bad to worse, deceiving and being deceived. But as for you, continue in what you have learned and have become convinced of, because you know those from whom you learned it, and how from infants you have known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith in Christ Jesus.
So it still talks about Timothy's own spiritual history. As Paul comes to verses 15, he tells Timothy that how from infancy you have known the Holy Scriptures. So Timothy had the grace of being brought up in a godly environment, and he was taught. And other than that, he had also spent time with Timothy. It's like he gives a summary of what I had said before, and he says that, however, you know about my teachings, my way of life. You know my persecution, my suffering, and what things happen to me. So those are the three things that the Apostle Paul uses to encourage, or rather urge Timothy to be loyal to Paul, because the issue here, he holds on, because the accusation was, or why people were leaving him, is that Paul had begun something new, and which we do not understand. What is this gentleman teaching? But he's saying, no, what I am teaching, or what I stand for, is what our forefathers stood for. And also why he's saying this is because he's doing it in contrast of the false teachers who had effectively left the faith. So what was the faith about? This is what Paul tries to explain as you read through the Pauline epistles. He's trying to bring the relevance, tells us that we should pray all the times. So we should not have times of prayer. I am not saying that it is wrong when we declare at the beginning of the year that we are going to pray for 21 days. That is just an encouragement. But the 21 days of prayer are as important as the regular prayer that we make every day. And Paul always remembered to pray for Timothy. And this tells us that remembering to pray for other people is very, very important. I remember that there was a time, Pastor Francis and Ruth, I don't know whether you can remember, I always used to tell you that when you pray, please pray for me. And I thank God that you prayed for me, because I needed that prayer. It's not wrong to cry. Sometimes when it's tears of joy, and even when we are pained, it's good to cry. But for Paul and Timothy, it could have happened when they parted. This time when Paul had to leave for Macedonia, while Timothy remained in Ephesus. Remember, they were very close. As we began, as I was doing a recap of what Reverend Osero shared with us as he was doing the introduction, that these two people were great friends and companions. Were they tears of joy? Were they tears of regret? Paul tells them that probably that is the last time he's seeing them. So they were left shedding tears. And Paul continues to tell Timothy in verse 4 that I long to see you. I long to see you. So remember, we said that this is the main reason why he writes the letter. He is asking Timothy to join him. So can someone read 2 Timothy chapter 4 verse 9? 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 9.
Second Timothy 4:9. Do your best to come to me quickly.
So the Apostle Paul, in the letter that we are reading, he is telling Timothy to make haste and come to him quickly. So he longs to found a report. He doesn't know what's happening. So they need to meet, fellowship, and maybe receive a report on how he has fared as a bishop, a young bishop. And Timothy had so many challenges. He was fearful. And also at the same time, Paul also needs company. So that's why he's saying, I long to see you. I long to have your company. Have you ever been in a situation where you long to see someone? Can there anyone of us who has an experience where you have longed to see someone? And yes, Cyrus.
Yes, I've had that experience when my wife went home and I was left to cook for myself and to prepare stuff. I had forgotten. I've forgotten how to prepare meals for myself. So I actually called her to hasten her coming.
Yeah, it's true that sometimes in families when maybe a spouse is away, there is that longing of seeing one another, especially if the relationship is working. And Rhoda, you are laughing, it's true. If it's working, then you long, and if it's not working, you wish it's longer. They could stay away longer. Yeah. Any other experience? Yes, let's hear from Mama.
Praise God. I also went to college in Baringo, and I left my family behind. And it was my first time to be in college. I was employed, yes, but it was my first time. I went for 6 months. By that time, there were no phones. So I was waiting for every Sunday after church, my husband and children could go somewhere. And so I was prepared every Sunday after church. They could go to a call box, and we had a call box in college, waiting. And we are so many waiting for a line so that your turn comes. Unasikia simu ni yako. And it was really, it was so tough for me for 6 months. No phones, waiting at the call box. So
even from the two stories, you see what causes the longing is the bond, the closeness. And this is what we see in Paul and Timothy. I believe that Paul also longed to see Timothy the same as Timothy also longed to see Paul. And as we study this, we should also remember the Bible talks about those who long for the coming of the Lord. So we should also have that longing. So, what will give you the longing for Christ is the bond that we develop with the Lord. And that's why we are talking about regular prayer. As you pray, as you study God's word, as you have that close communion with the Lord, that is when your spirit will begin to talk about Maranatha. Lord, come soon. Lord, come soon. You will be longing for the coming of the Lord. But if you are this Christian who does not have a close relationship with the Lord, when you hear about the coming of the Lord, you are afraid. You don't want the Lord to come. You are not sure when he comes what will happen. But when you study the story of the relationship between Paul and Timothy, is like this. Paul is very sure about Timothy. He tells him, come quickly. And we'll continue reading what he says about it. And I was also challenged that Paul talks about joy. Joy, he still talks about joy. He says, recalling your tears, I long to see you so that I may be filled with joy. And he's talking, he wants to be filled with joy, and he's in prison. So when he sees him, he will be filled with joy. And I believe that is what we should be to each other. I know if I asked you, you could also share experiences where you were in trouble, you were in difficult, you could have been bereaved, you could have had some loss. But when someone who loves you came around, it's like there was joy. Yes, you were bereaved, but there was that joy of the brother or sister or a friend coming around. And when we come to verse 5 talks about Lois and Eunice, and we don't have much to say about it. Reverend Osero spoke about it last week. So Lois was Timothy's grandma, and Eunice was Timothy's mother, who was a Jewish Christian. You can read this in Acts chapter 16 and verse 1. Let's look at Acts 16 verse 1. One of us can read. Acts 16 verse 1.
Acts 16:1. Paul went first to Derbe and then to Lystra, where there was a young disciple named Timothy. His mother was a Jewish believer, but his father was a Greek.
Yeah, so that gives us a brief history of Timothy, about the parents, that the mother was a Jew, but the father was a Gentile, and probably he was not a believer, though we are not given all the information. And why we would guess so, because we don't hear so much about him and the issues of faith. And probably that is why Paul was very close to Timothy, because he became like a father to him. And let's move to verse 6. The Apostle Paul says that, for this reason I remind you to fan into flame. We have used this verse to encourage people who have backslidden. Like they are not doing well, which is not bad. But then what the Apostle Paul has in mind here, it doesn't mean that the ministry of Timothy, or this gift of ministry, had gone out. But what he's telling Timothy is that there is need for that constant